Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we venture into the frozen wilderness of Canada, where small towns harbor secrets darker than the longest winter night. 7 documented cases that defy explanation await you. These are not urban legends passed down through generations. These are real events that shattered communities and left investigators with more questions than answers. Disappearances that break the laws of physics. Crimes that remain unsolved decades later. Discoveries that forced authorities to reopen investigations they hoped would stay buried. Each story you are about to hear is backed by official records, witness testimony, and evidence that continues to haunt those who encountered it. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let's step into the isolated villages and forgotten towns of the Canadian wilderness, where help is hours away, and the truth is something far more terrifying than being alone. My name is Evan Mercer, and what happened to me in the small town of Hollow Ridge, Ontario, is something I still can't fully explain. I was 23 at the time, a geology student sent to survey land near an abandoned mining site. Hollow Ridge was one of those sleepy Canadian towns where nothing ever changed. The kind of town where the same 3 trucks drove down Main Street every morning, where the coffee shop closed at 6 sharp, and where people knew your name before you even arrived. I stayed in a small rented cabin just outside town. It wasn't fancy. Creaky floors, drafty windows, and a chimney that groaned whenever the wind pushed from the north. But it felt peaceful, safe. That was before the knocking started. It was my second night. The temperature had dropped to almost minus 30 degrees Celsius. Outside, the world looked frozen solid, wrapped in a thick, eerie stillness. Even the trees seemed to stand a little too still. I was reviewing my notes when I heard it. 3 slow knocks, not frantic, not loud, just deliberate. I assumed it was someone from town, maybe checking on me. But when I stepped to the door and looked through the frosted window, I didn't see anyone. Only a shape, a tall, motionless silhouette standing just beyond the porch light. Too still to be human, too dark to be a shadow. And then it whispered my name. I froze where I stood, my hand still gripping the doorknob. For a moment, I thought maybe the wind had played a trick on me, that the whisper was nothing more than air slipping through the cracks of the cabin's old frame. But then it came again, soft, breathless. Evan. I stepped back from the door so fast, I nearly tripped over my boots. My heart hammered against my ribs. No one from Hollow Ridge knew me well enough to come out here. And certainly no one would be wandering around in the deadly cold at this hour. I grabbed my jacket, not to go outside, but because the temperature inside the cabin suddenly dipped. I could see my breath now, swirling in pale clouds. The heater rattled, struggling. Then the porch light flickered. When it steadied again, the silhouette was closer. Not walking, not moving, just suddenly closer, like the darkness itself had shifted and brought it forward. I stepped to the window again, wiping a circle in the frost. My fingers trembled. Through the tiny cleared spot, I finally saw enough detail to know something was wrong. Very wrong. The figure had no face, not hidden, not covered, just smooth, featureless, like someone had carved the outline of a person out of the night and left it standing there. And then, with slow mechanical movement, the thing tilted its head, not left or right, but slightly forward, as if it were sniffing the air, as if it knew exactly where I was. I backed away from the window, every instinct in my body screaming that something was terribly, dangerously wrong. I'd grown up in the woods, I knew the normal sounds, the normal shapes, the natural movements of anything that lived out there. But this thing didn't belong to Hollow Ridge. It didn't belong to anywhere. I reached for my phone, but the screen stayed black. Dead battery, even though I'd charged it earlier. I tried the cabin's landline next, but all I heard was static. Not regular static either. Something rhythmic, pulsing, like slow, uneven breathing. I dropped the receiver. Outside, the porch boards creaked. Not from wind, not from settling, but from weight. Heavy, deliberate weight shifting from one foot to the other. Then the knocking started again, not on the door this time, on the window. The same window I had just wiped clean. 3 slow taps. Then another whisper. Too close. Far too close. Let me in, Evan. My stomach twisted. The voice didn't sound human anymore. There was an unnatural echo in it, like someone speaking through a long metal pipe. I grabbed the fire poker from beside the wood stove, holding it tight even though my hands shook. I didn't know what I would do with it if that thing broke in. But the small iron rod was the only thing in the room that made me feel less helpless. Then, suddenly, everything went silent. No tapping, no breathing, nothing. And that silence felt worse than the knocking ever did. For almost a full minute, I didn't move. I just stood there gripping the fire poker, waiting for the next knock, the next whisper, the next sign that the thing was still there. But the cabin stayed unnervingly still, as if the world outside had stopped its breathing. Finally, I forced myself to inch toward the window. Not to look outside, I wasn't brave enough for that. But to pull the curtains shut. Anything to stop that thing from staring in. That's when I noticed something on the glass, a handprint, but not shaped like a human hand. Too long, too narrow. The fingers were stretched unnaturally far, tapering to points instead of fingertips. The print wasn't from flesh either. It looked like it had been burned into the frost, forming a dark, icy outline. I stumbled back, heart pounding. Then a loud thud hit the side of the cabin, followed by another and another. Something heavy was circling me, dragging across the wooden walls, scraping along the planks with a slow, deliberate movement, like claws tracing lines as it walked. I clutched the poker tighter, trying to control my breathing. The scraping stopped behind the bedroom wall, a single, sharp tap, right where the headboard rested. Then a whisper. Inside the wall, not outside. You shouldn't have looked at me. My blood ran cold. I stepped away from the bedroom entirely, refusing to go near it again. But before I could think of what to do next, the power went out, and the dark swallowed everything. The darkness inside the cabin wasn't normal darkness. It felt thick, almost physical, like it was pressing in from all sides. I fumbled for my flashlight on the kitchen counter, knocking over a mug in the process. When I finally got my hand around the flashlight and clicked it on, the beam flickered weakly. The batteries weren't dead. Something was draining the power. I swept the light slowly across the room, heart thundering in my ears. The cabin looked the same, but it felt different, colder, heavier, like I wasn't alone anymore. The beam landed on the bedroom door. It was slightly open now. I hadn't left it open. A soft creaking sound came from inside the bedroom. Not footsteps, something else. Something sliding across the wooden floor. I pointed the flashlight toward the crack in the door. The light caught movement. Slow, gliding. Too smooth to be human, I took a step back, nearly tripping over my own boots. The thing inside the room shifted again, and for a split second, I saw something reflect the flashlight beam. Not eyes, but something wet like ice melting. A low humming sound started vibrating through the walls. It wasn't mechanical. It was like a distorted voice, stretched and layered, whispering multiple words at once. Then, without warning, the bedroom door creaked fully open. A long, shadowed arm reached out, impossibly thin, fingers tapering into sharp, blackened points. It touched the floorboards and began pulling the rest of itself forward. It was coming out, and there was nowhere for me to run. I stumbled backward until my spine hit the kitchen counter. The flashlight trembled in my hand, the beams shaking wildly across the floor as the creature dragged itself further out of the bedroom. It didn't crawl the way a person would. It slid as though its joints bent in ways I couldn't see or didn't exist. Its body was long and thin, almost skeletal, but its surface wasn't skin. It was smooth and dark, like something carved out of frozen ash. And every time the light landed on it, the flashlight dimmed a little more. "Stay back," I whispered, though my voice sounded useless, pathetic, swallowed by the cold. The creature paused. Its head lifted, not upright, but at an unnatural angle, as if it were trying to understand the shape of my fear. Then, slowly, with a horrid, stretching motion, part of its face began to form. Not features, not eyes or a mouth, just the impression of a face, like something pressing outward from beneath the surface, trying to remember how human expressions worked. And then it spoke. But the voice didn't come from its head. It came from behind me. "Evan." You opened the door. I spun around instinctively, nothing there. When I looked back at the creature, its head was closer, much closer, only a few feet away. The flashlight died completely. In the pitch black, something cold brushed the side of my neck, like a fingertip made of ice and bone. My knees nearly gave out. I don't remember deciding to move. My body simply reacted. I shoved myself away from the counter and blindly staggered toward the front door, hands outstretched in the darkness. My fingers grazed walls, furniture, anything that could guide me. Behind me, I heard the creature shift again, its limbs scraping softly against the floorboards like wet branches sliding across ice. The sound grew faster, closer. I reached the door and yanked at the handle, but it didn't budge. Frozen. I pulled harder, my breath turning the air white. The scraping stopped. Total silence followed, pressing down on me so heavily it felt like the air had frozen solid. Then a low vibration began to hum through the doorframe, like something leaning its full weight against the other side. "Let me in," the voice whispered again, impossibly close. I stumbled back, realizing with a wave of horror that the creature inside the cabin hadn't moved. The voice wasn't coming from it. It was coming from the other side of the door. There were two of them. The one inside began sliding toward me again, and the one outside pressed harder against the wood, the entire frame trembling. Trapped between them, the cabin no longer felt like a shelter. It felt like a coffin, slowly being closed around me. In a panic, I hurled myself toward the only place left, the small crawlspace hatch beneath the kitchen table. It wasn't meant for hiding, but it was the only part of the cabin with a latch on the inside. I fumbled beneath the table, found the metal ring, and pulled the hatch open. A puff of cold, stale air rushed up from the darkness. Behind me, the creature's limbs scraped rapidly across the floor, closing the distance faster than I expected. I lowered myself into the crawlspace and slammed the hatch shut, just as something struck it from above, with enough force to rattle dust down into my eyes. The cramped space was barely tall enough to sit in, my shoulders pressed against cold beams as I curled up, holding the latch down with both hands. The creature above moved slowly now, deliberately, as if trying to figure out exactly where I was. The boards above me groaned under its shifting weight. I covered my mouth, trying to muffle my breathing. Then, through the floorboards, I heard the soft, slow sound of something dragging its fingers over the hatch. A whisper seeped through the cracks like icy smoke. "You came alone." Outside, the second one began scraping along the cabin siding again, circling, waiting. I felt completely buried, like prey hiding from predators that already knew exactly where I was. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time lost all meaning in the suffocating darkness. The creatures moved less now, but I could feel their presence above and around me, like cold pressure squeezing the air itself. My phone, dead earlier, suddenly vibrated in my pocket. I didn't dare turn it on, but when I pulled it out, the screen faintly glowed. One notification blinked. "Unknown number, come out." My stomach twisted. I shut it off immediately, but the glow must have leaked through the cracks, because instantly something above me stopped. The boards creaked. Then came a sound that felt like needles scraping bone, the creature lowering its head to the floor. Slow sniffing noises pressed against the wood, following the faint trail of warmth my body gave off. I held my breath until my chest burned. Without warning, the cabin door slammed open from outside, a blast of frozen air rushing through the building. The second creature entered. I knew because the temperature dropped even further, and the first one reacted with a guttural, distorted hiss. For a moment, the two beings moved in a frantic blur above me, colliding, circling, whispering in overlapping voices I couldn't understand. Then, just as suddenly, they stopped. Total stillness. And then, footsteps, human footsteps. Heavy boots moving across the floor, stopping right above the crawl space. "Evan," a man's voice said, calm, familiar. "It's safe now, come out." But my blood froze. It was the voice of a man I knew was dead. I didn't move. Couldn't. The man whose voice I heard, Deputy Ron Keller, had died in a mining accident in Hollow Ridge nearly 10 years earlier. I'd seen the newspaper clipping during my research. Hearing him speak above me now felt more terrifying than the creatures themselves. "Evan," the voice repeated, gentler this time. "You can't stay down there." The boots shifted, slow, patient, as if whatever was wearing them knew I wouldn't come willingly. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the voice pushed through anyway, whispering right behind my thoughts. "We found you." The temperature dropped again. Frost began forming on the underside of the floorboards above me. Then, the boots weren't boots anymore. The footsteps softened, turned into dragging, stretching. Something long and sharp pierced between two boards just inches from my face. A black pointed finger slowly trying to wedge through. Another followed. I scrambled backward in the tight space, heartbeat exploding in my ears. The hatch latch rattled violently above me. They were trying to get in. Desperate, I kicked my way through the opposite end of the crawl space, splintering a loose board and spilling into the snow beneath the cabin. I didn't look back. I just ran. I kept running until Hollow Ridge disappeared behind the trees. To this day, I don't know what those things were, or why they knew my name. But sometimes, at night, outside my apartment window, I still hear the tapping. 3 slow knocks, and a whisper. "You came back?" My name is Lena Carver, and what happened to me near the small Canadian town of Blackwater Lake still keeps me up at night. I used to think small towns were safer, quieter, more predictable. Blackwater Lake looked like that kind of place when I first arrived. A rustic logging community surrounded by endless pine forests, frozen shorelines, and a lake so dark it reflected the sky like polished obsidian. I had taken a seasonal job at the local ranger station, mostly because I wanted to get away from the city after a rough breakup. I told myself the woods would help me reset, that silence would be good for me. But silence in Blackwater wasn't peaceful. It felt watchful. My first week there, the locals warned me about the lake. Not with stories or folklore, just looks. Quick, uncomfortable looks that said, "Don't ask." One old woman at the general store muttered something under her breath as she handed me my change. "Don't follow the voice after dark." I thought she meant wolves or coyotes. I laughed it off. That was before the night I heard the first call. I was patrolling the logging road near the lake, my breath turning to fog in the freezing air, when I heard a voice echo across the still water. A voice calling my name, not panicked, not struggling, just calling in a calm, steady tone. A voice identical to my own. I stood frozen, my flashlight shaking in my hand, because I was completely alone. I froze, straining my ears to confirm what I had just heard. The voice whispered again, more insistent this time. "Lena." My stomach dropped. My pulse shot through my chest like an alarm bell. I spun the flashlight toward the lake, scanning the frozen surface. But there was nothing. Just black ice stretching into the shadowed tree line. At first, I thought it must be someone pranking me. But the road was deserted. The ranger's cabin where I stayed was half a mile back, and the forest surrounding the lake was too thick for anyone to hide. Every instinct screamed that this was unnatural. The voice came a third time, now closer. Not across the lake, right beside me. I whipped around, shining the beam over the road and into the tree line. The snow crunched under my boots, yet I could hear nothing else. No movement, no footsteps. Just my own ragged breathing. Then I noticed the marks in the snow. They weren't like footprints. They were dragged, long and thin, spaced irregularly, leading straight from the tree line toward the lake. And at the center of the drag marks, frozen into the ice, was a faint reflection of my own face, staring back at me. But it wasn't me. I hadn't been on the ice at all. A chill ran through me. My instinct screamed to run. But I couldn't. Someone was calling me. And it was waiting for me to take the first step onto that lake. I couldn't move. Every fiber in my body screamed to turn and run back toward the warmth and safety of the ranger cabin. But the voice, that voice continued, soft but unwavering. "Lena, come to me." It was hypnotic, almost comforting in its tone, but every instinct in me told me it was a trap. I looked back at the drag marks. The way the snow had been disturbed, it wasn't random. It formed a path, like an invitation I couldn't refuse. I shook my head, trying to dispel the fear, and took a step backward. But the ice beneath my feet groaned. The sound wasn't just ice cracking. It was a deep, resonant groan, echoing across the lake like it had a voice of its own. The reflection in the ice shifted. My face twisted, eyes widening in silent terror. But it wasn't my expression. It was smiling, even though I had not. Something moved beneath the frozen surface. A dark shape, long and sinuous, sliding just under the ice where I couldn't touch it. It rose slightly, distorting the reflection of the moon above. I stumbled, trying to back away, and the voice shifted, becoming layered, as if many voices were now calling me at once. Then, from the tree line, I heard a crunch. Someone, or something, was stepping onto the ice. And I realized with horror that the reflection wasn't inanimate. It was waiting for me to join it. I stumbled backward, the snow crunching sharply beneath my boots. My flashlight flickered, then went out completely, plunging me into near total darkness. I could feel the cold intensifying, the wind off the lake carrying a scent of decay and something metallic that made my stomach twist. The voice was still there, but now it came from everywhere at once, above, below, behind. I could hear faint echoes bouncing across the frozen water. Panic forced me forward, but my boots slipped on the ice. I fell hard, scraping my hands and knees against the frozen surface. When I looked up, the reflection was gone. For a split second, relief washed over me. Then I noticed the silhouette. It wasn't human. It was elongated, its limbs stretched in unnatural angles. Its head tilted toward me, like a predator studying prey. The drag marks in the snow shifted, extending toward me as if the ice itself was reaching out. I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly, heart hammering. Behind me, the cracking ice echoed with unnatural rhythm. Not random, deliberate, like someone following my every step. I glanced back. The creature was moving with impossible speed, skimming over the ice without breaking it. And the reflection returned, not my own, but countless faces staring up at me from the frozen lake, all twisted in silent screams. I froze. My legs refused to move. The voice whispered once more, soft, insistent. "We've been waiting for you." I couldn't move. My mind screamed. My body refused to obey. The cold seeped through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. But that wasn't what terrified me most. It was the lake itself, alive, whispering, shifting under my weight. The reflection of the faces had grown larger, more distinct, pressing against the ice as though trying to reach through. Desperation forced me to crawl on hands and knees, sliding toward the tree line at the edge of the frozen water. The drag marks seemed to twist and writhe with every movement I made, elongating unnaturally, almost like the ice was bending reality around me. The whispering voices multiplied, overlapping in a cacophony that made my ears ring. "Join us. Come to us." A sudden crack ripped through the ice behind me. I whipped around. The elongated creature had emerged partially, black limbs stretching impossibly as it slid across the surface. Its faceless head tilted unnaturally, and the ice beneath it didn't break. It glided, defying physics. My stomach turned. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline pushing me forward. The tree line felt impossibly far. Every step, every crunch of snow seemed to accelerate the creature's advance. I dared a glance back. The ice faces were moving now, writhing in silent, frozen torment, reaching toward me. The whisper became louder, almost urgent. I stumbled, fell, and realized I couldn't outrun it. Not the creature, not the lake. And maybe not myself. I reached the edge of the tree line, barely conscious of the biting wind and freezing snow. Behind me, the ice cracked, not in the normal way, but in deep, jagged lines that spread outward like veins, snaking toward the shore. The faces reflected in the frozen surface were no longer silent. They twisted, mouths opening in frozen screams I could almost hear. I scrambled into the trees, branches tearing at my jacket, scratching my face, but I didn't care. I needed cover. Every step I took, I felt the presence of something moving over the ice, faster than humanly possible. The whispering voices followed me into the woods, wrapping around my mind, trying to draw me back. "Lena, come back." I ducked behind a massive pine, gasping for breath. My flashlight was still dead. I reached for my radio at my belt, hoping to call the ranger station, but the device only emitted static, distorted voices overlaying my own frantic breathing. A shadow moved between the trunks, impossibly tall and thin, gliding silently despite the snow. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, sliding around trees and obstacles without breaking stride. I could see its faceless head tilt, as if acknowledging my terror. Then I realized the worst. The lake wasn't behind it anymore. It had somehow followed me into the forest. Frozen, I watched as it glided closer, dragging a line of shadows across the snow. My survival instincts screamed at me, but I couldn't tell which way was safe anymore. Every path seemed to lead back to that black, whispering entity. I ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping against my face and arms. Snow crunched beneath my boots, but I couldn't hear anything else over the roar of my own heartbeat. Every time I glanced back, I saw it, or them, sliding effortlessly between trees, its faceless head constantly turning toward me. My mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. Limbs bent at unnatural angles, gliding over snow without leaving prints. It shouldn't have been possible, but here it was, chasing me. The whispering grew louder, now layered with dozens of voices, each one familiar, some sounding like friends or family I'd never seen in years. You can't escape. I stumbled over a fallen log, scraping my hands and knees across frozen bark. The creature slowed briefly, almost deliberate, letting me fall. It was toying with me. I heard a faint crunch of ice behind me and dared a glance toward the lake. The frozen water wasn't just a barrier anymore. It was alive. Faces pressed to the surface, mouths moving, eyes wide and frozen in terror, stretching toward me. I had nowhere safe to run. Adrenaline fueled my movements, but exhaustion was closing in. My breath came in ragged gasps. The creatures weren't just chasing me, they were herding me, guiding me towards something on the lake. And then I saw it. A small clearing in the trees leading directly to the ice, where the frozen faces were most concentrated. I realized, with a sickening certainty, that I was being led straight into the lake's heart. I skidded onto the frozen edge of the lake, snow and ice spraying around me. The reflection in the ice was horrifying. Countless faces staring up at me, mouths frozen in silent screams, eyes wide with terror. They seemed to move subtly, writhing as if the ice were liquid and they were trapped beneath it. The elongated creature slid effortlessly onto the ice behind me, its faceless head tilting unnaturally as it watched my every movement. Panic overtook me. I turned to run, but my boots slipped on the ice, sending me sprawling. I clawed at the surface, leaving shallow scratches as the icy water underneath seemed to ripple unnaturally. The voices rose in a chorus. "Join us! Join us!" It wasn't just the creature calling now. The lake itself seemed alive, its surface undulating like flesh, the frozen faces pressing upward, reaching for me. Some instinct told me to grab anything, to break the trance. So I picked up a fallen branch and waved it desperately. The creature recoiled slightly, but the ice faces continued to writhe. My reflection stared back at me, smiling, grinning, twisting in ways I couldn't. I realized that the lake wasn't just frozen water. It was a trap, a prison, and I had been lured into it. I scrambled toward the shoreline, heart hammering, breath freezing midair. But for every step I took, the faces multiplied, dragging shadows across the ice, whispering, "You cannot leave." And then, something beneath the ice surged upward, a dark, sinuous shape breaking the surface, moving toward me with impossible speed. I scrambled backward, slipping on the ice, my hands cutting against the frozen surface. The dark shape beneath the ice surged closer, twisting and elongating like liquid shadow. The faces beneath me seemed to scream silently, their mouths opening wider, eyes pleading, accusing, pulling at my mind. I could feel their cold, frozen despair trying to seep into my thoughts, paralyzing me with terror. The faceless creature behind me glided faster now, its limbs stretching impossibly as if the laws of physics didn't apply. I could feel the cold emanating from it, not just freezing my body, but freezing my very instincts, slowing my reflexes, making every movement heavier, more futile. The whispering chorus grew louder, overlapping, echoing off the frozen trees and across the black ice. You are ours. You cannot escape. I forced myself to focus on the tree line at the far end of the lake, the only place that might offer safety. My boots skidded, my hands clawed at ice. The shadow beneath the surface surged again, breaking through, jetting up like a black spear aimed directly at me. Then I noticed something. Another set of drag marks leading off the lake toward the forest, previously unseen, almost invisible in the moonlight. My instincts screamed, "Follow them." I lunged, ignoring the creeping cold, the writhing faces, the shadow lunging beneath the ice. With a desperate final push, I scrambled onto the snow at the tree line, lungs burning, hands numb, heart pounding. I hadn't escaped yet. But for the first time, I had hope. I burst into the tree line, collapsing into the snow, lungs burning, eyes stinging from frost and terror. The whispering stopped. For the first time, silence wrapped around me like a fragile shield. I looked back at the lake. The ice was calm again, black and still, reflecting the moon like nothing had happened. No faces, no shadow. Nothing. I didn't understand how I had survived. The drag marks leading off the ice ended abruptly at the tree line. I realized with a shiver that whatever had called me to the lake had allowed me to escape, at least for now. Maybe it had been testing me. Maybe it had been watching me all along. I couldn't tell which was more terrifying. I stumbled back to the ranger cabin, hands shaking, snow caking my hair and coat. The warmth inside didn't feel like comfort. It felt temporary, fragile, like a thin barrier between me and the lake's dark whispers. That night, I swore I would never return. I told the locals I'd slipped on the ice and fallen. No one questioned me. They already knew. But I can't stop hearing it. At night, in my apartment far from Blackwater Lake, I hear the faint echo of my own voice calling me. I see black reflections in puddles, shadows gliding where they shouldn't. And I know, with a bone-deep certainty, that one day, the lake will call again. I just hope I can run fast enough. My name is Marcus Dempsey, and this happened the summer I decided to escape city life for a week in the woods near Pine Creek, a tiny, almost forgotten town in northern Canada. I'd heard rumors about abandoned cabins scattered along the creek, some left from logging days, others older, untouched for decades. I was looking for solitude, peace, and maybe a little adventure. I didn't know I would find something far darker. I parked my car at the trailhead, slung my backpack over my shoulders, and began hiking along the creek. Birds sang, the water trickled over rocks, and for the first hour, I felt nothing but calm. Then I noticed it. A cabin in the distance, tucked among pine trees. It looked like no one had touched it in years. The wood was gray and splintered, the windows coated in grime, but smoke was curling faintly from the stone chimney. Curiosity pulled me closer. As I approached, the forest seemed to hush, Even the wind died. I felt eyes on me, though I saw no one. I stepped onto the creaking porch, ran my hand along the splintered railing, and a sudden chill went down my spine. Inside, the cabin was dark, surprisingly intact. The smell of wood and dust mixed with something metallic, faint, but unmistakable. Then I heard it, a voice calling from the back of the cabin, not shouting, not panicked, just a low, calm murmur. "Welcome, we've been waiting." I froze. The door behind me slammed shut. And then I realized something terrifying. The path I had taken through the forest was gone. I spun toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began creeping in, slow and insidious. The low murmur continued from the back of the cabin, echoing against the wooden walls, almost vibrating in my chest. I fumbled for my flashlight in my backpack. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the interior. A small, square room cluttered with old furniture and a thick layer of dust. Everything looked ordinary, except the shadows. They weren't just cast by the furniture. They seemed alive, twisting and stretching along the walls, growing darker as I watched. A soft creak sounded above me. I froze. The cabin had only one floor, or at least I thought it did. The floorboards behind me groaned again, but no one was there. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to smash the door or window and run. But the door still refused. It was as if the cabin itself had swallowed the path behind me, erasing my escape. Then I saw it, a faint glow coming from the back corner, where the shadows pooled thickest. It wasn't fire, not exactly. More like a faint, pulsating light emanating from beneath the floorboards. Something wanted me to come closer. Against every instinct, I took a step forward. The floorboards beneath my boots vibrated slightly, and a whisper slithered along the walls. "Closer. You belong here." I stopped. My pulse thundered. The cabin wasn't just abandoned. It was hungry. And I was the only thing in the room it wanted. I took another hesitant step toward the glow, every nerve screaming at me to stop. My flashlight flickered, casting the shadows in grotesque, exaggerated forms. They seemed to lean forward, stretching toward me, as though alive. A sudden draft swept through the room, even though all windows were closed, carrying a metallic scent that made my stomach lurch. Then the whispers changed. They were no longer calm. Now they were layered, overlapping voices, some male, some female, all speaking my name, calling me into the darkness. I stumbled, tripping over an old chair, and my flashlight skittered across the floor. Its beam landed on something that made my blood run cold, a row of old photographs leaning against the wall. They were all of me. Not just me now, but images of me from that day. Moments I didn't remember anyone seeing. In every photo, my eyes were wide in terror, my expression frozen as if the cabin had been recording me all along. I yelped and scrambled backward, almost falling over the same floorboards that now seemed to shift under my feet. The glow beneath the floor pulsed again, faster now, and a low, grinding hum filled the room. It felt alive, like the cabin itself had lungs. I realized I had a choice. Follow the glow and discover what it wanted, or try to find another way out. But with the door gone and the shadows writhing closer, there didn't seem to be another option. My mind screamed for reason, but my feet moved almost on their own, toward the pulsating glow. As I approached, the floorboards shifted slightly beneath my weight, creating the sensation of walking on a living surface. The shadows stretched, wrapping around me, brushing my arms and legs like icy fingers. A whisper hissed from every direction. "Closer. Closer. It is yours." I reached the glow. The boards were warped, splintered. I knelt, brushing them aside, revealing a black hole beneath the floor. The light came from within it, flickering as if alive. A sweet, metallic scent wafted upward, making me dizzy. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, and for a moment, I thought of turning back. But the door was gone, the cabin sealing itself against escape. Then I saw movement inside the hole. Something coiled, twisting in the light. Its form was indistinct, liquid shadow with elongated limbs. A low, vibrating hum rose from its core, and I felt it resonate inside my chest. The whispers became voices I recognized, friends, strangers, family, all beckoning me, pleading. I almost touched it. A part of me wanted to surrender, to step into the darkness, to see what lay beneath the cabin. But instinct screamed harder. I pulled my hand back. The cabin reacted instantly. The walls shivered, the floorboards creaked violently, and the shadows lunged. The glow dimmed, but the whispers remained, trailing me like smoke. I realized one terrifying truth. This cabin wasn't just haunted. It fed on those who dared to enter, and it would not let me leave without a price. I stumbled backward, heart racing, and the shadows seemed to retreat slightly, though the hum persisted. My flashlight flickered back to life for a moment, casting brief illumination on the cabin's walls. They weren't wood, not entirely. The grains twisted like veins, dark liquid running faintly along the planks. I felt it watching, responding to every heartbeat. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Not my own, but something moving with deliberate purpose. I whipped around, flashlight slicing the darkness. Nothing, just the shadows. I heard it again. Soft, slow, almost human steps echoing in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I realized with horror, the cabin had a presence, a will, and it could imitate anything it wanted, including the sound of another person. My mind spun. How many had entered here before me, only to vanish, consumed by this place? The metallic scent thickened, almost suffocating, as if it were drawing me closer to the hidden hole. My instinct screamed to escape, yet the door was gone. Every window revealed only black, twisting forest, far beyond reach. The cabin itself had become a trap, a living maze. Even my memories felt distorted, as if the place was rewriting the past to confuse and ensnare me. I took a shaky step toward the far wall, hoping for another exit. But the floorboards shifted, forming a subtle slope toward the hole beneath the glow. Resistance seemed futile. I realized the cabin wasn't just hungry, it was patient. And it had been waiting for me. I forced myself to move, one careful step at a time, toward the far corner of the cabin, hoping for some overlooked exit. Each step made the floorboards groan, creaking in protest, the black glow pulsing beneath like a heartbeat. The shadows along the walls stretched and writhed, elongating unnaturally to follow me. The metallic scent grew stronger, almost nauseating, curling into my lungs and filling me with dread. Then I heard the whisper behind me, my own voice, perfectly mimicking my panic. "Come closer, it's waiting." My stomach dropped. It wasn't my voice. It was the cabin, speaking through me, manipulating my senses. I realized the cabin was more than haunted. It was sentient. It observed, calculated, and tested me. I stumbled, nearly falling into the glow beneath the warped floorboards. The blackness seemed to stretch upward, reaching like liquid smoke toward me. The photographs from earlier shifted in place, now showing images of me in impossible situations. Inside the cabin, in the hole, faces twisted in horror I hadn't yet experienced. A low vibration hummed through the cabin, resonating in my bones. The shadows around me coalesced, forming a vague humanoid figure. taller than any man, faceless, but unmistakably observing me. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the door was gone. The window frames warped, showing only endless black forest, no path to safety. I realized then the horrifying truth. I had been lured here. The cabin didn't just feed, it captured souls, and I was at risk of becoming the next permanent Fear clawed at me, but I forced myself to stay upright. The shadows were closer now, crawling along the floor, walls, and ceiling, twisting unnaturally, reaching for me. The glow beneath the floorboards pulsed faster, as if excited, anticipating my next move. My chest tightened with panic, and my hands trembled uncontrollably. I scanned the cabin desperately, seeking any tool, any object that might help me escape. My eyes landed on the fireplace. The embers were long cold, but the stone hearth looked solid. Maybe I could break the wall behind it, or use the remnants of firewood to wedge something under the warped floorboards. My mind raced with possibilities, but every instinct screamed that the cabin would fight back. Then I heard it again. Soft laughter, not human, resonating from beneath the floorboards. The shadows coalesced briefly into a faceless humanoid shape, its head tilting unnaturally, watching me. It exuded malice, yet also patience, like a predator observing a trapped prey. The metallic scent grew almost suffocating, curling into my lungs with every shallow breath. I realized the cabin wasn't just sentient. It adapted, feeding on fear itself, learning my reactions, anticipating my movements. Every step I considered, every strategy I devised, was already countered by the house. The glow beneath the floorboards seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heart, as though the cabin could feel my terror. I understood one thing. I could try to escape, but it would decide when and how I left. I gathered every ounce of courage and lunged toward the fireplace. The shadows writhed violently, recoiling from my movement, but remaining present, tangling with each other like living smoke. My hands gripped a thick, splintered log, and I smashed it against the warped floorboards near the black glow. The wood splintered, exposing a small crevice, and a low growl vibrated from beneath, echoing in my chest. The glow intensified, pulsing erratically, shadows flickering violently across walls, almost like they were dancing. Then the photographs shifted again. This time, they displayed scenes of me stepping into the hole beneath the floor, trapped in its black void, screaming silently. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the cabin had been showing me my possible fate. I smashed the floorboards again. This time, a hand, or something resembling a hand, shot up from the blackness. Long, thin, impossibly twisted fingers grazed my boots. I stumbled back in terror. The cabin seemed alive, breathing around me, the metallic scent almost choking. I took a deep breath, forcing my legs to move toward the far corner, where I remembered seeing a small trap door beneath a pile of dust and debris. Every step was a battle against the shadows, the whispers, the cabin itself. Yet, instinct screamed me onward. If I could reach the trap door, maybe, just maybe, I could escape this nightmare. The trap door loomed before me, half buried in dust. I dropped to my knees and pried at it with the broken log, teeth gritted in desperation. The shadows thrashed violently, surging toward me in black tendrils. The whispers crescendoed, overlapping my own frantic thoughts. Don't leave. Belong to us. Join us. I ignored them, focusing all my energy on opening the trap door. Finally, it budged, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The glow beneath the floorboards dimmed slightly, and the shadows seemed to hesitate. I didn't care. I leapt down the first step, bracing myself, and the cabin above me groaned in protest. The metallic scent followed, curling into the stairwell, thick and suffocating. But I pressed onward. I stumbled down the stairs, heart hammering, flashlight illuminating walls slick with dampness and faintly glowing veins of black. I could hear the cabin shifting above me, creaking, sighing, almost breathing, as if aware I had moved to its hidden underworld. The whispers followed, distorted and guttural, attempting to drag me back up. At the bottom, I saw a faint outline of another door. I pushed it open, revealing the forest outside, moonlight filtering through the trees. For the first time, I saw real open air, snow covering the ground and the stars above. I scrambled out, lungs burning, tears freezing on my cheeks. But as I ran, I couldn't shake the sense that the cabin hadn't let me go willingly. Something followed, watching, waiting for me to return. I ran through the forest, snow crunching beneath my boots, moonlight revealing twisted trees. Behind me, the cabin sat silently, yet I could feel it watching, pulsing, alive. I didn't dare look back. Every instinct screamed to keep running, to reach Pine Creek, to find anyone who could confirm the nightmare I had escaped. I finally reached the trailhead where I had parked my car. The road was empty. No town, no people. Just the winding forest path I had hiked in from. I tried to call someone on my cell, but the signal was gone. I didn't care. I drove straight back to civilization, my hands shaking, my heart hammering, vowing never to return. Days later, I researched the cabin. Locals referred to it only in whispers, the vanishing cabin of Pine Creek. People claimed those who entered never returned, or, if they did, came back different. Hollow, haunted, forever touched by the cabin's hunger. I can't explain why I survived. Maybe it allowed me to leave. Maybe it wasn't done with me. Even now, in the safety of my apartment hundreds of miles away, I feel it. Shadows flicker in corners, faint metallic scents linger in the air, and I hear soft whispers of my own voice calling me back. I know, without doubt, the vanishing cabin waits. And one day, it will come for me again. My name is Elaine Carter, and this happened during my summer break in Maple Hollow, a small Canadian town surrounded by dense forests. I had always been drawn to the woods, enchanted by their beauty and the solitude they offered. My plan was simple: spend a few days hiking, sketching the trees, and clearing my mind. I didn't expect to stumble into a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my life. On the second day, I ventured deeper than I ever had before. The canopy thickened, the sunlight barely piercing through. Birds and squirrels were strangely absent, replaced by an unsettling silence that pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. I noticed a narrow trail veering off the main path, almost hidden by fallen leaves. Curiosity pushed me forward, even as unease settled in my stomach. The trail led me to a clearing surrounded by towering pines. In the center stood a small, weathered cabin I had never seen on any map. Its wooden walls were darkened by age and moss, and a faint wisp of smoke curled from the crooked chimney. A chill ran down my spine. Despite the inviting warmth suggested by the smoke, something about the place whispered danger. I took a cautious step forward, and that's when I first heard it. A soft, unintelligible whisper, floating through the trees, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Elaine. My heart leapt. The sound was familiar, almost intimate, but it sent a shiver racing through my body. Something, or someone, was calling me into the woods. I hesitated at the edge of the clearing, heart pounding. The whispers continued, soft and melodic, yet chilling. They seemed to float on the wind, coming from all directions at once. My rational mind screamed to turn back, but my curiosity and a strange compulsion drove me forward. The cabin's door hung ajar, swaying slightly as if inviting me in. I stepped onto the mossy porch, each creak under my feet echoing unnaturally. Inside, the air was damp and musty, filled with the faint scent of wood smoke mixed with something metallic, sharp. Shadows clung to the corners of the room, darker than natural light allowed, and I felt them watching me. A single wooden chair sat in the center, facing a wall covered in carved symbols. They looked ancient, deeply etched, almost alive in the flickering light from a single candle someone had clearly lit recently. The whispers grew louder as I approached, forming fragments of words I could almost understand. Stay. Never leave. Belong. I wanted to run, but my feet moved forward of their own accord. Then I noticed a figure crouched in the corner, partially hidden by shadow. Its head tilted unnaturally, and though its features were blurred, I felt its gaze pierce straight through me. A cold gust slammed the door behind me shut, and the whispers became a chorus, circling my head. I realized too late. I had stepped into a trap, one I might never escape. I spun around, heart hammering, but the figure remained crouched, still and silent. The whispers pressed into my mind, fragments of voices I recognized and some I didn't. Friends I had lost touch with, strangers, children laughing, but all twisted into eerie calls, urging me to stay. I forced myself to step back, scanning the cabin for an escape. Windows revealed nothing but dense forest, thick and unyielding. The door was firmly shut, solid wood, impossible to move. My hands trembled as I reached for the candle, the flickering flame making shadows twist and stretch across the floor. Then the symbols on the wall seemed to shimmer. Lines of carving moved subtly, rearranging into words I could read. You are ours. You cannot leave. Panic surged. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair, and the figure's head tilted further, its presence radiating a suffocating heat and cold at the same time. I scrambled toward the corner, desperate to find any exit, but the floorboards creaked unnaturally beneath me. The whispers now overlapped, louder, chanting my name repeatedly. The cabin wasn't just haunted, it was alive, responding to fear, adapting to my movements, herding me into some unknown fate. Then I saw it. A small trapdoor under a tattered rug, half hidden. My pulse jumped. Could this be the only escape? I hesitated, the shadows writhing around me, waiting. I lunged for the trapdoor, lifting it with trembling hands. A foul metallic scent rushed up from the darkness beneath, accompanied by a low, vibrating hum that seemed to echo in my chest. The cabin above groaned and shifted as if reacting to my intrusion. I shone my flashlight down the narrow staircase leading into the basement. The shadows weren't confined to the cabin anymore. They moved along the walls, slithering, wrapping around the stairwell. I could see the faint outline of the figure following me, tilting its head unnaturally, waiting. I descended slowly, one step at a time, heart hammering, breath freezing in the cold air of the underworld below. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the wooden beams, the floor, the walls, even my bones. I tried to remember rational explanations. Gas leaks, echoes, hallucinations. But instinct screamed that nothing natural was here. Halfway down, my flashlight flickered and went out. I was plunged into darkness, but I could still see the faint glow of symbols etched into the basement walls, pulsating with an otherworldly light. Shadows wriggled along the floor, and the whispers circled my mind relentlessly. Stay. Forever. belonged to us. I knew I couldn't stay here. Yet every instinct I had screamed that the basement had been waiting for me, like a predator biding time. I needed to reach the bottom and find an exit before it fully consumed me. I reached the basement floor and froze. The room was vast, more than I expected, stretching beyond the beam of my flashlight. The glow from the symbols etched into the walls bathed the room in a sickly, greenish light. At the center lay a shallow pit, black as oil, rippling faintly as though something moved beneath the surface. The whispers intensified, merging into a single, guttural voice. "You cannot leave." My heart raced. I knew instinctively that the pit was the source of the cabin's power. Shadows flowed toward it like liquid, crawling along the walls, reaching out toward me. I stumbled back, my boots scraping against the cold stone floor. Every instinct screamed to escape, but the door above was gone. Vanished, replaced by solid wall. Panic clawed at me. The humanoid figure emerged from the shadows, taller and more defined now. Its head tilted unnaturally, faceless, as if studying me. I had nowhere to run. My mind raced. Could I somehow distract it? Fight it? The pit pulsed, emitting faint echoes of voices, people who had entered this place before me. I realized the truth with a shiver. The cabin collected souls, feeding on their fear, storing them beneath in the black pit. I had only one chance. Confront the darkness and find a way out, or join the countless whispers trapped forever in the depths of the whispering woods. I forced myself to move forward, every muscle tense, hands shaking. The shadows surged closer, thickening, twisting like smoke. The humanoid figure loomed, faceless, but I could feel its gaze pressing into my mind. The pit in the center pulsed with energy, faint whispers rising like a chorus of lost souls, calling my name, beckoning me to step closer. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic light over the symbols on the walls. They seemed to crawl, shifting subtly to form new words. Join us. Never leave. I swallowed hard, forcing my legs to carry me forward. Each step was a battle against instinct, against the cold terror squeezing my chest. I peered into the pit. Black liquid swirled, reflecting distorted images of myself. Terrified, screaming, trapped. The whispers grew louder, overlapping with my own frantic heartbeat, until I could barely distinguish my own voice from theirs. The figure moved closer, the shadows extending like fingers, almost grazing my skin. I realized the cabin wasn't just sentient. It was feeding on fear itself, learning my movements, reacting to my hesitation. My only hope was to reach the far corner of the basement, where I remembered a faint outline of another door, hidden behind a stack of crates. The shadows lunged as I ran, tendrils brushing my arms. But I kept moving, desperate to reach the door and escape the grasp of the whispering woods. I dove behind the crates and pushed them aside, revealing the hidden door. It was small, almost a crawl space, but it was my only chance. The shadows surged violently around me, and the whispers became deafening, echoing every word I had ever spoken. The faceless figure extended a limb, almost touching me. My hands shook as I opened the door and crawled through. The tunnel beyond was narrow, dark, and smelled of damp earth and decay. The shadows didn't follow immediately, but the hum from the cabin above vibrated through the walls like a living heartbeat. The whispers persisted, soft now, coaxing me to turn back, to surrender. I forced myself onward, crawling until I emerged into a thick grove of pines, moonlight filtering down and revealing real sky above me. I scrambled to my feet, breathing heavily, covered in dirt and scratches. Behind me, the cabin was barely visible through the trees, but I felt it, the presence, watching, alive. aware of my escape. I ran blindly, branches whipping my face, heart pounding like a drum. Every instinct told me to stop, to look back, but I refused. The whispers faded slightly as I reached the edge of the forest, where the path back to Maple Hollow began. I could finally hear normal sounds: crickets, the rustle of leaves, my own ragged breathing. But I knew, deep in my bones, that the whispering woods had marked me. And I wasn't truly free. I returned to Maple Hollow, exhausted and trembling, trying to act normal. I told locals I had gotten lost while hiking, that the woods were disorienting, and that the cabin I saw was abandoned and overgrown. No one questioned me. They all exchanged glances, hushed murmurs passing between them. I realized then that everyone in Maple Hollow knew about the cabin, but no one ever talked about it openly. That night, in my small rented room, I lay awake, listening to the wind rustling outside. A soft whisper echoed in my mind, my name, again, drawn out slowly, almost tenderly. I shivered. I had escaped the cabin physically, but mentally it had invaded me. Days passed, and I tried to forget. But subtle things began happening. Shadows moving just at the edge of my vision, objects shifting slightly in my room, cold drafts with no source. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faceless figure crouched in the corner of my bedroom, watching me, waiting. I began to understand that the cabin, and the forest itself, wasn't confined to Maple Hollow. It followed those it marked, whispering in the corners of their minds, feeding on fear. The more I resisted, the stronger the pull became. I realized one terrifying fact. Some places never let you leave, and the whispering woods had chosen me. I wasn't done with it, and it wasn't done with me. Weeks later, I returned to the edge of the woods, trying to confront the fear. I told myself it was a dream, hallucination, or an overactive imagination. The trail to the clearing was overgrown, yet instinctively I knew the cabin was still there, hidden, waiting. A chill ran through me as I felt the whispers brush against my mind, calling me back. I tried to leave, but the forest shifted. Paths I thought I remembered were gone, replaced by trees so dense I could barely see the sky. The air grew thick with metallic scent, and the whispers pressed closer, growing insistent, teasing, coaxing. I realized the woods themselves had become a living labyrinth, an extension of the cabin, designed to trap anyone it desired. I ran blindly, heart hammering, and eventually emerged onto a logging road leading back to town. Even then, the whispers lingered faintly, echoing in the wind, almost comforting in their familiarity. I shivered, knowing the cabin's influence wasn't gone. At night, I began hearing faint tapping at my windows, soft scratches in the walls, shadows that didn't belong. I realized the cabin, the whispering woods, didn't just trap people physically. It invaded their minds, following them across distances, marking them for the rest of their lives. Escape was possible, but peace? That was gone forever. Even now, years later, I feel its presence whenever I close my eyes. Shadows twist unnaturally, whispers curl around my thoughts, and the faint metallic scent sometimes fills my apartment. I know the cabin still waits in the clearing, hidden beneath moss and darkness, sending tendrils of fear out into the world, searching for the next curious soul. I've learned never to speak of it aloud. Sharing the story seems to strengthen its power, drawing its attention back to me. Yet I cannot forget. Sometimes I wake to see my own face reflected in mirrors, distorted, twisted as though the cabin is studying me even from miles away. I warn anyone who dares enter the whispering woods. Curiosity is deadly. The cabin watches. The shadows wait. and if it chooses you, it will never let go. The forest is alive, and it feeds on fear, whispering in every corner of your mind until you are nothing but a name, a memory, trapped forever beneath the blackened canopy. I sometimes hear my name faintly, drifting on the wind through my window. I know, with a sinking certainty, that one day the cabin will come for me again. And when it does, there will be no escape. I am Elaine Carter, and the whispering woods of Maple Hollow still claim me. My name is Liam Turner, and this happened one winter in Frostbridge, a small, snow-covered Canadian town. I had just moved into an old rental house on Frostbridge Lane, a quiet street lined with centuries-old homes, each more charming, or so it seemed, from the outside. I was drawn to the house because of its vintage architecture and low rent, unaware that its walls held shadows darker than the long winter nights. From the very first evening, I sensed something off. The air was unnaturally cold, even with the heater running, and I often caught glimpses of movement at the corner of my vision. A shadow darting across the hallway or a silhouette lingering by the window. I chalked it up to stress and fatigue, but the feeling of being watched persisted. The first night, I woke to soft tapping on my bedroom window. I live on the ground floor. Peering outside, the yard was empty, snow undisturbed. Yet the tapping continued, rhythmic, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. I pulled the curtains shut, telling myself it was the wind, a branch brushing against the glass. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. By the third night, I began hearing whispers from the hallway outside my bedroom. They weren't words I could understand, just guttural murmurs, rising and falling as if a dozen voices were moving just beyond the walls. I shivered under the blankets, my heart hammering, and realized the house was not just old. It was alive in a way I couldn't explain. Something wanted me to notice it. Something was waiting. By the fourth night, the whispers became clearer, forming fragmented words, almost like my name being dragged through a long tunnel. Come home. My skin crawled. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just the wind or my imagination. But the house had a rhythm of its own. The creaks of the floor, the groans of the walls, they all seemed synchronized, deliberately timed with the whispers. I got out of bed to investigate, flashlight in hand. The hallway stretched before me, dimly illuminated by the moonlight spilling through frost-covered windows. Shadows clung to every corner, moving just slightly when I wasn't looking. As I stepped closer to the living room, I noticed faint scratches on the walls, markings I hadn't seen before, like something or someone had been tracing them with long, pointed fingers. Then I heard it, the softest, coldest exhale behind me, as if someone had been standing in the hallway the entire time. I spun around. Nothing. Only the shadows, dancing unnaturally. I realized I was not alone. The house was aware of my presence, feeding off my fear, learning my routines. The whispers coaxed me toward the living room, but every instinct screamed to stay away. Something was waiting there, something patient, hiding just out of reach, ready to reveal itself only when it was ready to claim me. I stepped forward, heart hammering, knowing I was walking directly into its trap. The living room was silent, except for the faint ticking of a long-abandoned clock. The air was icy, curling around my lungs with every breath. My flashlight illuminated a rocking chair slowly moving back and forth, though the room was empty. The shadows stretched across the walls, forming shapes almost humanoid, but wrong. Arms too long, heads tilting impossibly. I tried to leave, but the door behind me groaned shut. I was trapped. My pulse quickened, and the whispers rose into a chorus, voices overlapping, calling my name in distorted tones. Liam, stay, belong. I backed up, eyes scanning the room desperately. Then I saw it. A figure crouched in the corner, faceless, wrapped in shadows, its head moving unnaturally as it watched me. The rocking chair continued to move, though no one sat in it. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but my legs refused to respond. I felt the house testing me, feeding on my fear, observing every tremble, every panicked heartbeat. I noticed the floorboards beneath the figure subtly shifting, curling upward like the edges of a black wave. The whispers urged me closer. Look, see, join. I took an involuntary step forward. The air grew colder, the shadows more oppressive, and I realized the house wasn't just haunted, it was a predator, and I was the prey. One step further, and I would know what truly lurked within Frostbridge Lane. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to back away. But the shadows followed, curling and stretching toward me. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams that illuminated parts of the room in grotesque detail. The floorboards beneath the crouching figure rippled, pulsating like a living entity. I realized the house itself was sentient, bending the space around me, warping reality. A cold gust slammed the windows shut, and the whispering chorus rose to a deafening crescendo. I could feel my sanity fraying, my mind unable to distinguish between real and hallucination. Then, almost imperceptibly, the faceless figure began to emerge from the shadows, taller, more defined, its presence pressing on my chest like a physical weight. The rocking chair abruptly stopped. Silence fell, except for a low, vibrating hum coming from the floorboards. I noticed a faint outline of a trap door near the fireplace, partially hidden under a faded rug. It had been there all along. My pulse spiked with hope, yet dread washed over me. The house would not allow escape so easily. I edged toward the trap door, careful not to provoke the figure. But as I reached out, something cold and intangible brushed against my arm. I jerked back, heart pounding, realizing that every instinct, every step I took was anticipated, measured, countered by the house. If I wanted to survive Frostbridge Lane, I would need courage beyond fear and luck beyond reason. I flung the rug aside and yanked open the trapdoor. A staircase descended into pitch-black darkness, the air inside thick and metallic, carrying the whispers of previous victims. The shadows above recoiled slightly, almost in anticipation, giving me a narrow chance to escape. I descended carefully, every creak of the steps echoing into the vast underworld beneath the house. The walls of the stairwell were slick, damp, and etched with runes that pulsed faintly, glowing in rhythm with the house itself. The whispers became clearer, chanting, "Join us, forever, belong." I swallowed hard, forcing my shaking legs downward. At the bottom, the basement stretched far beyond the limits of my flashlight, filled with a black, viscous substance that moved like water but shimmered with shadowy tendrils. Figures emerged within the black liquid, twisted and broken, their eyes glowing faintly as they called to me. My stomach churned. The house had trapped countless souls here, feeding on their fear, and now I was on the edge of becoming one of them. I stumbled back, nearly falling into the abyss. The whispers pressed closer, circling my mind, promising safety only if I surrendered. I could feel the faceless figure from above, pressing through the walls, observing, anticipating my next move. There was only one choice. I had to keep moving, find an exit, or be trapped beneath Frostbridge Lane forever. I crept along the basement floor, careful not to touch the black, viscous substance that squirmed like living shadows. The whispers swirled around me, insistent, tugging at my thoughts, almost coaxing me to surrender. Every instinct screamed to run, yet my legs carried me forward, toward a faint light at the far end. The glow revealed a small door, old and weathered, its edges warped by time. I reached for it, but a hand, or something like one, clutched at my ankle from the shadows, icy and suffocating. I yanked my leg free, stumbling forward, nearly tripping over the slick floor. The whispers became deafening, overlapping into a single distorted voice. "You belong here?" The faceless figure appeared above the door, looming impossibly large, shadow tendrils writhing along the walls. The basement seemed to contract, walls pressing inward as if the house itself were alive. I knew there was no turning back. One more step, and I would either escape or become part of its collection forever. Summoning every ounce of courage, I threw myself at the door and pushed it open. Cold wind rushed in, carrying a hint of snow and moonlight. I scrambled through, slamming it behind me, and felt the oppressive pressure of the house lift slightly. But not completely. I had escaped, but the whispers lingered, a reminder that the house was far from finished with me. I emerged into the snowy yard, heart racing, body trembling from cold and terror. Frostbridge Lane was quiet, almost unnaturally so. My breath formed clouds in the frigid air as I glanced back at the house. The windows were dark, yet I could feel the shadows watching me, bending and stretching along the walls like liquid smoke. I ran down the lane, snow crunching under my boots, not daring to look back. Every instinct warned me that the house was not just a building. It was a predator. My escape had only delayed the inevitable. The whispers followed me, faint now, like an echo carried by the wind. Reaching the main road, I tried to call a taxi, but my phone flickered with static, the battery draining unnaturally fast. When I finally saw headlights approaching, I waved frantically. The vehicle stopped, and I collapsed inside, shivering uncontrollably. I told the driver I was lost, terrified, trying to explain the house in the basement. But the words felt hollow. He nodded silently, driving me toward town. The streetlights illuminated Frostbridge Lane behind me. The house stood there, dark, silent. But I knew better. The shadows within it waited patiently, always hungry, always watching. For a long time, I thought I was free. But freedom was a lie the house did not allow. Its hunger lingered, patient, calculating, waiting for the next night. Back in my small apartment in town, I tried to rebuild normalcy. But at night, faint whispers drifted in through closed windows, carrying a cold metallic scent. Shadows twisted along the walls, small at first, then larger, mimicking the tendrils I had seen in the basement. I tried to ignore them, to convince myself it was trauma. But I knew better. Objects in my apartment began to move slightly, subtle at first. A cup tipped over, papers shifting on a desk, shadows curling in corners that should have been empty. I started sleeping with lights on. But the whispers persisted, wrapping around my mind, growing clearer. You cannot hide. We know. One night, I woke to see faint outlines of figures at the edge of my bed, writhing and twisting, their faceless forms pressing against the walls. My heart hammered as I realized the house had followed me, extending its reach beyond the lane, beyond Frostbridge itself. Fear became my constant companion. I no longer walked alone at night. I avoided windows, avoided mirrors, tried to block out the sound of the whispers. But I knew deep down that the house's hunger was endless, patient, omnipresent. It would not forget me. It would not forgive me. I understood then that Frostbridge Lane was more than a street. It was a living trap, a sentinel feeding on terror. And I had become marked. Months passed. I tried to move forward, tried to live a semblance of normal life, but the memories never left. The basement, the black substance, the faceless figure, all haunted me. I began having vivid dreams of the house, each more terrifying than the last. In my dreams, the shadows grew taller, stretching into my mind, calling me back to the basement. I even returned once to Frostbridge Lane during the day, thinking sunlight would diminish the horror. But the house remained there, silent, solid, yet somehow aware. The windows seemed to glimmer with the same pulsing light I had seen in the basement. I realized that the house was not bound by time. It waited patiently for the moments when it could prey on the curious or the desperate. I stopped speaking about it. Explaining the house only seemed to amplify its reach. I could feel it whenever I thought too loudly about it, or even when someone mentioned Frostbridge Lane in conversation. My nights were restless, shadows creeping closer with every sunset. I knew the house had changed me. Fear was no longer a reaction. It had become a permanent companion, a tether linking me to the darkness that waited within Frostbridge Lane. The whispers never fully left. They only grew quieter, patient, ready to rise again. Even now, years later, the house's presence lingers. On quiet nights, I can hear faint whispers carried on the wind, echoing names and promises of safety that I know are lies. Shadows twist unnaturally in my apartment, curling and stretching, watching, waiting. I sometimes dream of returning to Frostbridge Lane. In my dreams, the house grows larger, more monstrous, the shadows merging into one endless black tide. I wake sweating, my heart pounding, convinced it has reached for me in the night. I cannot escape it. The house, the shadows, the whispers, they are patient, and I am marked. Every time I close my eyes, I feel its tendrils brushing against my mind, testing, probing. The hunger is relentless. If you ever visit Frostbridge Lane, know this: the house watches. It remembers. And if it chooses you, it will follow, patiently, until it has claimed you. I am Liam Turner, and the haunting of Frostbridge Lane is far from over. Even now, it waits. I warn anyone who dares curiosity. Do not go looking for the house, because the moment it notices, the shadows will begin to follow, and escape is never guaranteed. My name is Sophie Reynolds, and this happened during a hiking trip last autumn in Elkwood, a remote forested region in Canada known for its winding trails and dense pines. I had always loved solitude in nature. The quiet crunch of leaves underfoot, the chill of morning mist clinging to the trees. That day, I set out alone on Elkwood Trail, eager to capture photographs of the autumn foliage, unaware that something far darker awaited me. The trail was unusually silent, even for a forest. Birds seemed absent, and the wind barely rustled the branches. Around midday, I reached a bend near an old wooden bridge, and that's when I first felt it, a presence watching from the shadows. I paused, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. Only the shadows seemed to twitch unnaturally, stretching along the trunks like black fingers. I pressed forward, but a strange disorientation set in. The trail behind me seemed altered, as if the trees had shifted while I wasn't looking. My GPS began to glitch, flashing no signal, even though the area normally had reception. A sense of unease settled in my chest. Then I heard it, a faint whispering, almost imperceptible, carried on the wind. At first, it sounded like my own name. Sophie, Sophie. My heart began to race. The forest had grown darker, colder, and the feeling of being watched intensified. Something wasn't right. And I knew, deep down, that Elkwood Trail was far more dangerous than it appeared. I forced myself to keep walking, telling myself it was just nerves and exhaustion. But the deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to shift around me. Trees that should have been behind me now appeared ahead, branches curling into twisted shapes, forming shadowed corridors that led nowhere. The GPS flickered again, then died completely, leaving me utterly alone. Suddenly, I noticed a faint figure between the trees. At first, I thought it was another hiker, but it moved unnaturally, jerking and swaying as though gravity had no hold over it. Its form was indistinct, dark, almost dissolving into the shadows around it. I froze, heart pounding, and the whispers grew louder. "Sophie, come." I tried calling out, but no sound emerged. The figure disappeared, leaving only the swaying shadows and a sense of suffocating pressure. My footsteps quickened, but each step seemed to make the shadows stretch further, following me, closing in from all directions. I stumbled over roots, catching myself against a tree, and realized the trail I thought I knew had completely vanished. I was lost. The whispers seemed to come from every angle, overlapping, mocking, guiding me toward something I didn't want to find. Panic surged through me, but I knew running blindly would only make the forest's hold stronger. I had to observe, plan, and survive. Though I wasn't sure if survival was even possible. I backtracked slowly, trying to retrace my steps, but the trail twisted impossibly, looping back on itself in ways that made no sense. Every familiar landmark seemed altered. Rocks where trees should be, moss growing in unnatural patterns, shadows forming grotesque shapes that flickered just at the edge of my vision. The whispers intensified, merging into words I could almost understand. "You can't leave. You belong." My chest tightened, and I realized the forest itself was alive, aware of my fear, feeding on it. My flashlight illuminated glimpses of movement. Branches curling like arms, shadows forming indistinct faces that stared at me, vanished when I looked directly. I stopped near a creek, hoping the water would provide some orientation. But the reflection in the water startled me. My own face was distorted, pale and hollow-eyed, surrounded by dark tendrils curling behind me that weren't mine. I spun around. The forest was empty, or at least it seemed so. I pressed forward cautiously, the whispers now behind me, guiding me deeper into the woods. The sense of being stalked was unbearable. Every step, every sound, every shadow suggested a presence, patient and relentless. I understood then that I was not merely lost, I was being hunted. Fear coiled around my mind like a living thing. Every instinct told me to stop, but survival demanded I keep moving, even if it meant walking straight into the heart of the forest's darkness. The trees grew thicker, their twisted branches forming an almost solid canopy above me, blocking out sunlight. The air became damp and cold, carrying a metallic scent that made my stomach churn. My flashlight flickered, revealing more of those impossible shadows, faces and limbs forming in the darkness, dissolving the moment I tried to focus. Suddenly, I heard it. Footsteps that didn't match my own, soft, deliberate, following closely. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, but I forced myself to stay calm. I called out, "Who's there?" Silence, then a whisper in my ear. "Closer." I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing. Just the endless, suffocating forest. My breath came in shallow gasps as I realized the forest could hear me, feel my fear. I was trapped in a living labyrinth, And the shadows weren't merely watching. They were shaping the trail, herding me toward an unknown end. I stumbled over a fallen log, catching a glimpse of something even more horrifying. Dozens of small, human-like figures crouched among the roots and shadows, faceless, writhing, beckoning me. Panic surged, but I knew stopping would be fatal. The whispers now formed a single, sinister chorus. "Join us." I ran blindly, the forest bending around me, every step dragging me closer to the unknown. I had no idea how long I'd been running, but I knew one thing. Elkwood Trail had claimed many before me, and it would not let me leave easily. I emerged into a small clearing, moonlight breaking through the canopy, illuminating a decrepit cabin I hadn't seen on any map. Its windows were shattered, doors hanging crooked, but the air around it thrummed with a dark energy. The whispers now echoed loudly from within. "Come in. Join us forever." I knew instinctively that the cabin was the heart of the forest's power, the epicenter of its predatory awareness. My flashlight flickered, then went out completely. I could feel the shadows pressing against my skin, cold tendrils brushing my arms, as if testing my resolve. I debated running past, but curiosity, a deadly impulse I had fought to suppress, pulled me closer. The door creaked open as I approached, revealing darkness so dense it swallowed the light of the moon. I heard the whispers more clearly now, distinct voices among the chorus, voices of people I had never met, crying, pleading, laughing, trapped in some twisted limbo. Every instinct screamed to flee, but I couldn't stop. The cabin seemed alive, aware of my every thought. One misstep, and I feared I would be absorbed into the darkness forever, becoming another voice in the chorus. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped onto the porch, knowing that once I entered, there would be no turning back. I pushed the cabin door open, and darkness swallowed me. The air inside was cold, thick, and metallic, pressing against my lungs. Shadows danced along the walls, stretching unnaturally, twisting into forms that were almost human. The whispers became voices I could almost understand. "Stay. Stay with us." My heart pounded as I realized the cabin was more than a building. It was the forest given form, the predator's lair. I took cautious steps, trying to locate a light switch or source of illumination. My flashlight, still flickering, revealed a strange mural on the far wall. Twisted trees merging into human faces, mouths open in silent screams. The figures in the mural seemed to shift slightly, writhing in anticipation. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards beneath me, synchronized with my heartbeat. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing. Only shadows curling in corners, watching, waiting. The whispers rose again, louder and more insistent. "Join us. Forever." My instincts screamed to run, but my legs felt frozen, rooted to the floor. I realized then that the cabin didn't just want to trap me. It wanted to consume me, absorb me into the forest itself, turn me into another shadow among the trees. Every instinct, every fiber of my being begged me to fight, to escape before it was too late. I turned toward a broken window, hoping it might be my only way out. I climbed through the broken window, scraping my hands and knees on splintered wood, and fell into the snow outside. My breaths came in ragged gasps, forming icy clouds as I scrambled away. Behind me, the cabin seemed to pulse with darkness, shadows spilling into the clearing like living tendrils. I ran blindly through the forest, branches slapping my face, roots tripping my feet. The whispers followed, a chorus of distorted voices urging me onward. "You belong. Come back." I dared not look back, but every instinct told me that whatever haunted Elkwood Trail was close, stalking silently, patient as a predator. After what felt like hours, I reached a familiar bend in the trail, the one I'd passed earlier. Relief surged through me, but it was short-lived. The trail behind me was unrecognizable, twisted, warped by some unnatural force. The forest seemed endless, closing in, bending reality itself to trap me. I realized I had entered a domain where the rules of the natural world no longer applied. Time, space, direction, they all obeyed the will of the forest, and it wanted me. Desperation surged, and I pushed forward, clinging to the hope that I could somehow reach the edge before the darkness consumed me entirely. I didn't know if survival was possible, but stopping meant certain death. Hours, or maybe minutes later, I stumbled into a small clearing bathed in faint moonlight. In the center stood an old stone marker, covered in moss, almost glowing. Something about it felt safe, though I couldn't explain why. The whispers faded slightly, replaced by an eerie silence, as though the forest were holding its breath. I approached the marker cautiously. Engraved on its surface were symbols I didn't recognize, but they seemed protective, forming a barrier between me and the forest. The shadows recoiled slightly, writhing in frustration, as if my proximity to the stone weakened their control. I knelt, tracing the symbols with my fingers, feeling warmth radiate through my hands. But then the whispers returned, louder, angrier. "You cannot escape. You belong to us." I glanced up. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, a tall, faceless silhouette, limbs twisting unnaturally. It didn't move toward me, only watched, patient and omniscient, waiting for a moment of weakness. I realized the forest wasn't a mindless predator. It was intelligent, testing, observing, learning. The trail I thought I could follow was no longer real. Every step had been guided, manipulated. And yet, the stone marker gave me a fleeting advantage, a chance to survive, if only I could use it. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the final confrontation with whatever lurked in the heart of Elkwood Trail. I circled the marker, drawing strength from its faint glow. The faceless figure remained, unmoving yet oppressive, a constant reminder of the forest's power. Slowly, I realized I could manipulate the shadows using the symbols, forcing them back with the energy they radiated. The whispers became frantic, overlapping, voices shrieking, "No, not her. She cannot escape." Carefully, I edged toward the trail leading out of the clearing, keeping the stone marker between me and the figure. The snow crunched loudly under my feet, echoing through the trees. The shadows surged toward me, twisting and stretching, but the light from the marker pushed them back. My heart raced, adrenaline coursing through every vein. I sprinted forward, following the faint moonlit path, feeling the oppressive force of the forest pressing from all sides. The trail seemed to straighten as I ran, finally leading me to the edge of the woods. I glanced back once. Through the trees, I could see the faceless figure standing at the boundary of the forest, motionless, waiting. The whispers had faded, but their promise lingered in the cold night air. I stumbled onto a dirt road leading to town, gasping, frozen, and disoriented. The forest behind me was silent, deceptively calm, but I knew better. Elkwood Trail had released me, for now, but I was forever marked. Even back in town, I could feel Elkwood Trail's presence lingering. At night, shadows crept along walls, twisting unnaturally. The whispers sometimes returned in dreams, carrying faint metallic scents and icy drafts. Every rustle of leaves outside my window, every creak of the floorboards, reminded me that the forest had not forgotten me. I documented my experience cautiously, warning others online, but people dismissed it as exaggeration or fear. I knew the truth. The forest was patient. It waited for those who entered, learning, feeding, testing. I was lucky. I had survived, but the mark remained. Sometimes I dream of returning, drawn against my will. The faceless figure, the shadows, the whispers, they call to me, pulling me back into the heart of Elkwood Trail. I know one day, curiosity or misfortune might bring someone else to its edge. If you ever hike Elkwood Trail, remember this. The forest is alive, aware, and hungry. Step lightly or risk vanishing like countless others. I am Sophie Reynolds, and the vanishing on Elkwood Trail is a warning, not just a story. The shadows are patient. They wait. Even now, as I write this, I feel them, just beyond the edges of vision, ready to follow. My name is Ethan Harris, and I never believed in haunted places until the day I explored Red Pine Valley Asylum. Abandoned for decades, it sat at the edge of a small Canadian town, shrouded in fog and rumor. I had heard the stories from locals, patients vanishing without a trace, screams echoing through the halls at night, doctors whose experiments crossed moral lines. As a paranormal investigator, I was drawn to it like a moth to flame. The gates were rusted, hanging crookedly on their hinges. Ivy crawled up the walls, covering the peeling paint and shattered windows. A cold wind swept across the courtyard as I stepped inside, my flashlight flickering against graffiti and debris. Every step echoed through the empty halls, mingling with faint, distant sounds that I couldn't place. I entered the main corridor and noticed the wards branching off on both sides. The air was heavy, smelling of mildew and decay. Yet beneath it, something chemical lingered, like antiseptic long gone rancid. I felt eyes on me, though the halls were empty. Then I heard it, a low hum, almost imperceptible, coming from the end of the hallway. It sounded like a voice, but distorted, warped by the building itself. Stay. Forever. My heartbeat quickened. Something about the asylum pulsed with a life of its own, watching me, waiting. I had come to investigate the unknown, but I didn't yet realize that Red Pine Valley was a trap, and the unknown was very much alive. I cautiously moved down the corridor, my flashlight casting thin beams across peeling walls and broken tiles. The hum from before intensified, reverberating through the halls like a low chant. Doors to the old wards hung open, revealing rusted beds and decaying medical equipment. Each room whispered secrets of the past, of suffering and despair. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, nothing. Just shadows, shifting unnaturally with no source. My rational mind tried to convince me it was the building settling, but instinct screamed otherwise. The hum grew louder, forming fragmented words. Join, us, stay. I reached the main nurses' station, where patient files lay scattered, yellowed and brittle. Flipping through them, I saw names, diagnoses, and notes describing experiments that were cruel, unethical, and inhuman. Many patients were listed as disappeared. My stomach churned. I realized that the asylum's horrors didn't end with its closure. They lingered. A cold hand brushed my shoulder. I whipped around, but the hallway was empty. Panic clawed at my chest, but curiosity pushed me forward. I needed to understand what had happened here, though every instinct begged me to flee. As I approached the central hall, the hum became voices. Dozens of them, overlapping, pleading, screaming, whispering. The shadows gathered at the edges of my vision, writhing like living smoke. I understood then. The asylum itself was alive, feeding on fear, and it had taken notice of me. I entered the central hall, a massive room with a collapsed ceiling. Moonlight filtered through broken panes, illuminating dust motes that swirled like tiny spirits. The hum had grown into an almost deafening chorus of whispers. "You can't leave? You belong." I felt the air thicken, every breath a struggle. Shadows stretched along the walls, forming twisted humanoid shapes. Some reached toward me, but when I looked directly, they dissipated into smoke. Panic surged, but I forced myself to move forward. At the far end of the hall, I noticed a large room marked Experimental Wing. The door hung ajar. A faint light glowed inside, though no electricity should have existed. I stepped closer, compelled, horrified. Inside, I saw old surgical tables, rusted instruments, and a wall covered in old photographs, patients staring blankly, faces pale, eyes hollow. And then I saw them. Figures crouched on the floor, shadows coalescing into almost human forms, faces missing or warped, moving toward the light like moths drawn to fire. My flashlight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to merge with them. A cold whisper tickled my ear. "You'll stay forever." I stumbled backward, realizing the asylum had trapped me in a web of its own making. Every door, every corridor, every shadow conspired to keep me inside. Escape was no longer just difficult, it was impossible. I backed out of the experimental wing, my flashlight flickering wildly. The central hall had changed. Doors that weren't there before now lined the walls, each one dark, ominous, whispering promises I didn't want to hear. The shadows stretched, crawling along the ceiling and walls like liquid darkness. I realized the asylum wasn't static. It shifted, grew, and manipulated reality itself. My steps echoed unnaturally, and I began to lose track of time. What felt like minutes may have been hours. Every corner I turned led me deeper into the asylum, and every room held remnants of suffering, echoes of torment, whispers of those who had vanished. Then I saw movement at the end of a hallway. Someone, or something, standing perfectly still. A nurse's uniform, torn and yellowed, her face hidden behind shadow. But I could feel eyes burning through the darkness. She, or it, raised a hand, beckoning silently. Fear rooted me to the spot, but curiosity, deadly as it was, pushed me forward. I could almost hear the asylum laughing through the walls, alive and intelligent. The floor beneath me trembled slightly, and a chorus of whispers erupted. "Join us! Join us!" I realized then that the asylum had drawn me here for a reason. It wasn't just haunted. It was hungry, patient, and extremely clever. And I was the newest prey. I reached a spiral staircase descending into the basement, a place no visitor would dare enter. The steps groaned under my weight, echoing through the hollow asylum. Darkness pooled below, thick, almost tangible, pressing against my chest. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of patient cries, laughter, and distorted chants. "You can't escape. You are ours." I stepped carefully into the basement, my flashlight illuminating broken restraints, rusted wheelchairs, and old medical charts. The smell of decay and antiseptic filled my nostrils. Shadows clung to every corner, writhing, stretching, some forming faceless human shapes that advanced silently. Then I heard it, a soft metallic clink behind me. I turned slowly. A figure had emerged from the darkness, its face featureless, uniform tattered, hands reaching toward me. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with darkness. I realized the asylum fed on fear itself. Every heartbeat, every gasp, Every shiver strengthened it, and it wanted me to surrender. I backed toward a door on the far side, praying it would lead outside. The shadows surged forward, tendrils reaching, but I could feel a faint resistance, as if some part of me could still fight. I had to survive, or become another lost soul trapped within Red Pine Valley forever. I reached the far door and yanked it open, revealing a narrow corridor leading to a small exit at the end. The shadows seemed to recoil, as if aware of my intent to escape. My flashlight flickered wildly, but I pressed forward, each step reverberating through the asylum like a warning. The whispers became frantic, overlapping, almost panicked. "No, don't leave. Come back." The walls along the corridor were lined with peeling photographs of patients, some smiling, others frozen in terror. Their faces seemed to twist subtly when I wasn't looking, eyes following me, mouths opening and closing in silent screams. I forced myself to keep moving, knowing the asylum's patience was legendary. One misstep, and I would become another shadow within its walls. A cold, unseen hand brushed against my shoulder. I whipped around, nothing. But the sensation lingered, sending a shiver down my spine. I realized the asylum could interact with me directly, sensing my fear and using it to strengthen its hold. I reached the exit and pushed the heavy door open, revealing a small, overgrown courtyard. Moonlight spilled across cracked concrete, and for the first time since entering, I felt a glimmer of hope. But even here, the whispers lingered, fading, but not gone. Red Pine Valley Asylum was patient. It could wait decades for its next victim. I stepped into the night, determined to leave, but I knew some part of me would never truly escape. The courtyard was overgrown with weeds and ivy, and the cold wind cut through my jacket. I glanced back at the asylum. Its broken windows and rusted gates seemed to leer at me. The building itself seemed to pulse, alive, its shadows stretching like arms, trying to reach me. The whispers, though distant, carried over the wind. "We will find you." I stumbled through the weeds, branches tearing at my clothing. Each step forward felt like a battle. My legs were exhausted, my chest heaving. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting faceless figures to emerge from the ruins. A sudden screech echoed from the asylum, sharp and inhuman. Shadows surged toward me across the courtyard, twisting like liquid smoke. Panic overtook me, and I sprinted blindly, slipping on mossy stones, scraping my hands, desperate to reach the tree line at the edge of the property. When I finally burst into the forest beyond the asylum, I slowed, trying to catch my breath. The trees were familiar, yet unfamiliar, somehow distorted by the asylum's lingering influence. I knew the building had extended its reach beyond its walls. Even now, decades later, I remember the sensation of being watched, of being followed, as if Red Pine Valley had marked me for life. I had escaped, but I was never truly free. I ran through the forest, trying to distance myself from the asylum. Yet, no matter how far I went, I felt its influence pressing against me. Twigs snapped underfoot, and shadows darted between trees, twisting unnaturally. The whispers followed, faint but insistent. "You cannot escape. You belong." Eventually, I stumbled into a small road that led to town. My flashlight died completely, leaving only the dim glow of the moon to guide me. Every instinct screamed that the asylum had extended its reach, that the shadows could follow me anywhere. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, glancing back at the forest. The asylum sat silently in the distance, but I could feel it watching, patient, waiting for the day it would reclaim me. My hands shook as I started the engine, the whispers fading but never gone entirely. Driving away, I realized the asylum had not only marked me physically, It had embedded itself into my mind, my memories, my dreams. I had escaped its walls, but I could never escape its presence. Years later, I still receive letters, anonymous notes, and strange calls. The asylum is patient. It waits, and I fear it may be waiting for me again. Back in town, life continued, but I was changed. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of rooms, and the wind carried whispers I couldn't ignore. Every night, I dreamed of the asylum. Faceless figures, distorted patients, walls that shifted impossibly. The memories of that place were etched into my mind, relentless and vivid. I researched its history, uncovering dark truths, unethical experiments, missing patients, and reports of paranormal activity spanning decades. Locals whispered that the asylum consumed those who dared enter, leaving only hollow shells of the living behind. I had come seeking proof, but I had found more. A permanent imprint, a connection I could never sever. Sometimes, in broad daylight, I would see shadows at the edges of vision, twisting toward me, testing the boundaries. Every step I took reminded me that Red Pine Valley Asylum wasn't just a building. It was a predator, patient, ancient, waiting. And I had survived only because I had been lucky, or because it had allowed me to leave for now. I realized the asylum's reach was broader than the physical space. Its influence lingered, shaping the town, the forest, and my mind. Escape was temporary, but memory was eternal. Even now, when I close my eyes, I hear the whispers, "We will find you." And I know that one day they might. I have learned to live with the presence, but it is never gone. Red Pine Valley Asylum waits in the distance, patient, knowing, intelligent. Every whisper, every shadow in my home, every dream is a reminder that some horrors never end. I warn anyone who dares explore it. The asylum is alive. It knows fear, it feeds on it, and it waits for those who are curious or desperate. My story is not fiction. It is a warning. The building itself is a predator, and every corner hides a fragment of its intelligence, a fragment of the countless souls it has claimed. Even now, I hear the faint metallic hum in my apartment at night. I feel cold fingers brushing my arm as I walk down empty streets. Red Pine Valley Asylum is patient. It waits, biding its time until it can claim another victim. I am Ethan Harris, and I survived the forgotten asylum of Red Pine Valley. But survival came at a cost. The shadow of the asylum follows me wherever I go. One day, I fear it will catch up, and when it does, I may never return. If you ever come across Red Pine Valley, heed my warning. Curiosity is dangerous. The shadows are intelligent, and some places are better left forgotten.